Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Brexit Secretary David Davis says Parliament may not get a chance to vote on any deal with the EU before we leave. He's been speaking to the Commons Brexit Select Committee this morning and said that negotiations could continue right up to the moment of departure, which is the end of March 2019. It's a little complicated. Let's have a listen.
You've made two very significant observations today. The first is your answer a moment ago when you said that it is possible that Parliament might not vote on the deal until after the end of March 2019. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm summarising correctly what you said.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, in the event we don't do the deal until then. Yeah.
There we go. That was Hilary Benn. He's the chairman of the Commons, quotes, Brexit Select Committee. We used him to try and clarify what had actually been said. Let me go back to basics here, Margot Jones, and ask this. Will Parliament get a vote on the deal?
Parliament has agreed, the government has agreed for a vote on the deal by Parliament, and that was agreed back in March. So there will be a vote.
There will be a vote on whatever, assuming a deal is done.
Yes.
Whatever is agreed with Mr. Barnier and Mr. Davis, the deal is there. Parliament will then get a vote for and against that deal.
That is what Parliament agreed back in March.
Right. When will that vote be?
Well, you heard what David Davis said. I mean, I think the government is confident of getting a deal before the actual deadline of March 19. And in any case, as you know, we are pressing for an implementation period of approximately 2 years after that date.
So that'll be part of the deal?
We would hope to get that agreed much sooner than the final deal. Much sooner, because we need that
certainty. But the implementation
for business.
period will be part of the deal?
The implementation period, I would imagine, would be part of the deal. But we have to remember that, you know, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. So I wouldn't want to be too pronounced on that. But the objective, the Prime Minister set out the objective quite clearly, which is that a 2-year, roughly, implementation period will be agreed, hopefully by the end of this year or early next.
Right. I mean, you say it's quite clear, but actually it's not that clear. Some of the finest minds in this building have spent the morning trying to work out what it is David Davis was actually saying. So let me continue with some basic questions. What would be the point of a vote in Parliament after March 2019, when, in effect, we will already have left?
Well, you only played a very, very short clip from that committee hearing. My impression from what David Davis was saying was that, in theory, if the negotiations went up till midnight on D-Day, Parliament might have a vote immediately afterwards.
But what would be the point? Because the choice for Parliament...
I think his tone was such that that would be a very unlikely scenario.
Right, but he raised it. We didn't raise it. He raised it.
Well, the committee raised it.
Well, he answered it saying yes. If there was a vote after 2019 on a deal, let's say the deal's been done, but it went right down to the wire, which has happened in Europe before, but the vote can't happen until after the end. Surely Parliament's choice then is a Hobson's choice. Is either to vote for the deal or to vote to leave without a deal. That's the choice.
Well, I think you get...
Isn't it?
No, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. We want to negotiate the implementation period, and we've had, I think, a good response from Europe in that they also want that, and that should be in place.
Right, but if it goes down to the wire, there won't be a vote until after the Article 50 process is already done and dusted, correct?
Well, if the implementation period is agreed as part of the overall a length of time, there won't be any change, will there?
But either we get out with a deal or we get out without one. I mean, Parliament having a vote is no real choice on that. That's the point.
I think if there is a serious threat of Britain leaving without a deal, we will know well before March 2019.
Well, that's really not what Mr. Davis was saying this morning, so it's not that clear. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, I think we're in a very, very worrying situation, genuinely. I mean, actually, the Prime Minister has sowed more seeds of confusion here because she said, and she doesn't seem to have gone against this, that we couldn't sort out the transition deal until after we'd sorted our trade deal, which is part of the final deal. So really the government seems to be all over the place on this. And it's very, very worrying because this is already impacting on so many businesses in our country and, of course, on individual citizens as well, particularly EU ones. So I really would implore the government to get more of a grip on this.
Just very briefly, will the trade deal, our future relationship with the EU, will the trade deal be part of the deal, or will that be decided during the transition?
I would hope that that would be part of the deal. But Article 50 actually states that when we leave the European Union, we leave with our future arrangements agreed, at least in principle. So I fully expect...
But you don't know?
Well, I mean, I think what you've got to remember, Andrew, is that there are two parties to this negotiation.
No, but I'm remembering...
It is not all
I'm not asking about the EU's position. What I'm trying to get is the government's position, and you're not able to tell me.
The government's position is that we will leave the European Union in March 19 with an approximate length of 2 years for an implementation period for business to get used to.
No, I asked you if there would be a trade deal or not.
Well, I would very much hope that
the
trade deal will be part of that, of course.
Well, we'll see if things get clarified as the day goes on. It was a confusing session in places that Mr Davis had with the Common Select Committee.
The Brexit Secretary has suggested Parliament might not get a vote on any Brexit deal until after the UK leaves the European Union. David Davis told a committee of MPs it was possible talks with Brussels wouldn't conclude until just before the UK's withdrawal in March 2019, and that ratification could happen after that date. But Labour says Parliament has to have a meaningful vote on Brexit, and that wouldn't be possible if Britain had already left. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
Brexit's about Britain taking back control, the promise to the country before the EU referendum and since. But will the UK Parliament be guaranteed a vote on the historic deal to leave the European Union before it's done?
Welcome, Secretary of State.
Today, the Minister in charge of Brexit answered no. He told MPs getting a deal, if there is one, could go down to the wire, the last moment before Britain leaves.
It's no secret that the way the Union makes its decisions tends to be at the 11th minute, the 59th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th day, and so on. And that's precisely what I would expect to happen here. It will be under a lot of pressure. It will be very high stress, very exciting for everybody watching, but that's what would happen.
So what about the government's promise Parliament would have a meaningful vote on the deal?
So the vote
the undertaking we've given,
could be after March 2019?
No, it could be, yeah. It could be. It depends when it concludes. I mean, Mr Barnier, remember, has said he'd like
the vote of our Parliament, the UK Parliament, could be after March 2019?
Yes, it could be.
Did he mean that? Ministers had promised MPs a vote ahead of Brexit.
When you said that it is possible that Parliament might not vote on the deal until after the end of March 2019. Now, I'm summarising correctly what you said.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, in the event we don't do the deal until then, yeah.
So Theresa May's government could strike a deal without getting Parliament's backing first. Sounded clear, but then came the time to explain that to MPs.
Can the Prime Minister please explain how it's possible to have a meaningful vote on something that's already taken place?
I'm confident because it is in the interests of both sides, and it's not just this Parliament that wants to have a vote on that deal, but actually there will be ratification by other parliaments, that we will be able to achieve that agreement and that negotiation in time for this Parliament to have the vote that we committed to.
That wasn't a promise Parliament would get a vote before Brexit, just a hope the deal would be done in time to give MPs the vote they want. Some Tories say the Brexit deal should be made law by Parliament, or else.
My own view is if the government were to try to do it without statutory authority, there must be a serious risk that there would be a legal challenge to the government doing it. And therefore, I think it's very much in the government's interest that it should have a statute to underpin the final deal.
The government's trying to smooth over the row about Parliament's right to vote, saying Britain will get a good Brexit deal and in good time. Convincing the doubters in Europe and here at Westminster, that's much more easily said than done. Tonight, the Brexit department is saying it expects and intends MPs to get a vote before Britain leaves. But David Davis was equally clear he expects a nail-biter. If MPs are not guaranteed that vote, rebel Tories may try to force ministers to promise one. The greatest danger potentially facing the government, if Parliament does throw out the Brexit deal when it's done, that could shatter the government's authority and even call its very survival into question.
OK, John, many thanks for that. John Pienaar there live at Westminster.
There have been mixed messages from the heart of government about how and when Parliament will get to vote on any Brexit deal. The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, said today that the deal could come at the 59th minute of the 11th hour, meaning MPs would only get to vote on it after Britain had left the EU. That was then contradicted by Theresa May at Prime Minister's questions, but Labour MPs are still furious. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Can you unpick the confusion?
What David Davis was trying to do in this committee session, this particular point in the evidence he was giving, was he was trying to make the point that the EU, in his opinion, always push things to the wire. And he said, he actually said they might even push it right up to the moment of Brexit, midnight on the 29th of March 2019. That might be when the deal was cut. He then made the mistake, I think, on reflection, he might work out, of pursuing the logical conclusions of that all the way down a rabbit hole. And when he was asked, well, when would the vote that Parliament has been promised on the Brexit deal happen if the deal has only been cut at that moment, he said, well, it would happen afterwards. Well, that started a few flashing red lights in Downing Street. The Prime Minister in question time came forward and said she was quite confident it wouldn't go all the way to the wire like that. And what you're going to hear is her answer to the question in Prime Minister's questions in a second. But first of all, how David Davis dealt with the questions put to him in the committee.
So it could be as late as March 2019?
It could be at the same time, yeah.
That's
why I said it could be coterminous with it, yeah.
And which point do you envisage Parliament having a vote?
As soon as possible thereafter.
This Parliament,
as soon as possible thereafter, yeah.
As soon as possible thereafter. Yeah. So the vote
the undertaking we've given,
could be after March 2019?
Yeah, it could be, yeah. It could be. It depends when it concludes. I mean, Mr Barnier, remember, has said he'd like
the vote of our Parliament, the UK Parliament, could be after March 2019?
Yes, could be. Okay. Could be. The thing
Which
to remember...
would be,
well, it can't come before we have the deal.
Can the Prime Minister please explain how it's possible to have a meaningful vote on something that's already taken place?
I'm confident because it is in the interests of both sides, and it's not just this Parliament that wants to have a vote on that deal, but actually there will be ratification by other parliaments, that we will be able to achieve that agreement and that negotiation in time for this Parliament to have the vote that we committed to.
Well, some of this comes down to the unpredictability of the Brexit process. I think some of it as well must come down to the breezy, self-confident style of David Davis. He was lounging back as he was giving his evidence, name-checking MPs. Some ministers sit there tense and tight, completely different body language. At one point he was saying he was so confident of how all the governments around Europe, what exactly it was that they were thinking. He said his department knew very well, they had all the intelligence. He said, except for those countries without a government at the moment, like Czechoslovakia. Well, Czechoslovakia separated 25 years ago, hasn't had a government for a very long time. I think it proves that you probably need to be a bit self-policing in these circumstances, watching your words much more cautiously because of the repercussions. But in the end, David Davis has been around a long time. This is his style. I suspect we'll get a few more episodes a bit like this.
Thanks, Gary. Well, joining me now is the Labour MP Chuka Umunna, who's in the House of Commons, and from our Westminster studio, the Conservative MP Vicky Ford. So let's talk about this confusion between David Davis and Theresa May today about when the House of Commons will get to vote on any deal, if there is a deal. Chuka Umunna, what's the problem? He misspoke.
Well, what we need is a guarantee that we will get a vote before we leave. And what you have heard is the Secretary of State reneging on a promise that was given to the House of Commons on the 7th of February this year, that we would get to vote on a negotiated deal before we leave. And that seems no longer to be the case. That is the problem with what he has said today. And you'll remember...
But they've corrected it, so it is the case.
No, they haven't corrected it, Christian. And I've read the statement that was put out by David Davis's department. They say they expect to be able to do a deal, and therefore have a vote before we leave. But they do not guarantee that we will get it. And let's not forget, they were dragged kicking and screaming to give Parliament a vote on the final deal. And also, let's not forget that the reason many people voted to leave was in the name of taking back control to Parliament, which represents the people. And every time you see the government dealing with this process, they want to avoid parliamentary scrutiny. So what we need is a guarantee. We haven't got it yet.
Vicky Ford, do you think you have a guarantee of a vote?
So I've listened to David Davis also when he presented the withdrawal bill, being very clear that Parliament will have a vote in the Commons and in the Lords. And we've seen that again in the statement that came out for clarification today, that there will be a vote in both chambers. It is difficult for him to say exactly when that will happen. I spent 8 years in the European Parliament, and these negotiations do tend to go to the wire. But the wire is not the last day in March 2019, because actually the final stage in this process is a vote in the European Parliament. That always needs some time for preparation. Any motion in the European Parliament has to be translated, for example, so there's always a number of days the motion has to be tabled in advance, and that would
but it could still be March, couldn't it?
No, it can't just be the last minute, the last night. The European Parliament doesn't allow you to do that because of the language issues, apart from anything else. There were always a number of days when the agreement needs to be struck before the final vote.
Are you not concerned that the Brexit Secretary didn't seem to know this?
He is aware of that, but
well, he's
also making it very clear, and I think this is right to make it clear to people, that these negotiations are likely to go up to the end of the negotiating period because there's 27 countries here. But what we have heard very, very clearly is the statement today saying both the Commons and the Lords will get a vote. That's what I've heard, and that's what I want, Chuka.
Sorry, Vicky, you're trying to defend the indefensible. The point is not whether we get a vote, because that seems to have been agreed to, albeit it needs to be by means of an act of Parliament. What you are dodging in Christian's questioning of you is the timing of it. What on earth is the point in us having a vote on a deal after we have left the European Union? It only really, frankly, matters if we're doing this before our EU withdrawal arrangements are finalised. And we haven't got that guarantee.
Yes, you have. Because
no, you have not.
Chuka, if you read Article 50, it is very clear that the final process in Britain's withdrawal is the vote in the European Parliament. And that is the final bit where we leave. And before that, we're told that both the Commons and the Lords will have a vote. So there will be a vote. We can't set the exact day on it yet, but I believe, like you,
well, what if you haven't got a deal?
Why can't you just say
Vicky Ford, what if you haven't got a deal by the beginning of March?
I don't understand it.
Then there is an exit without a new trade deal. Okay, I do not believe that is good. I do not believe...
And there's no vote, just to be clear.
So let me make it very clear. They've said that there will be a vote before the vote in the European Parliament.
No. The question is, we want a guarantee that that vote will come before we leave the European Union. And if you're so confident, I don't understand why the Prime Minister is not able to give that guarantee today. They fudged it. You're fudging it now.
No, I'm not fudging it now, Chuck. I listened very carefully. They've promised to vote, and I want to vote just like you. Just like you, I want to make sure that we leave.
Do you want to vote before we leave?
I want to vote, and I want a deal. And I think we should be. Yes, we should be having a vote, and yes, we should be having a deal.
Just in the last 10 seconds, can I just ask you both this question? If there is no deal, would you both actually like a vote in the House of Commons about whether you can stop this whole process? Chuka, just in 5 seconds. Should you have a vote on whether to go ahead with no deal?
I think the Parliament should get to determine how we withdraw from the European Union.
With the option being to stay in?
We should have that option.
With the option to stay in?
In principle, I have no objection to that.
Vicky Ford, just in 5 seconds.
I'm completely focused on getting a deal. It's in our interest and Europe's interest to get a deal.
Chuka, Vicky Ford, thank you very much.
Well, speaking of politics, sometimes it is hard to avoid the sense that the government hasn't entirely got got its story straight when it comes to Brexit. You might have noticed that. This morning, appearing before MPs, the Brexit Secretary conceded they might not actually get a vote on the deal until it was too late to do anything about it. In other words, after we had already left.
The vote of our Parliament, the UK Parliament, could be after March 2019?
Yes, could be.
Okay.
Could be. The thing
Which
to remember...
would be, sorry, and
well, it can't come before we have the deal.
You said that it is possible that Parliament might not vote on the deal until after the end of March 2019. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm summarising correctly what you said.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, in the event we don't do the deal until then, yeah.
Not surprisingly, MPs didn't like that too much, which led to swift clarification from both his own department and the Prime Minister. Don't worry, they said, you will get a vote, or to be more precise, it is our intention to give you a vote. So is that clear or is that not clear? Well, here is a man who should be able to help with this knotty question. Our political editor, Rook Peston. So, Robert, I put it to you. Is that clear or is that not clear?
Well, David Davis made that classic mistake of a politician. He actually said what he thinks. And what
Never a good idea. Yeah.
And what he thinks is that these negotiations, particularly on a trade deal for after we leave the EU, will be ferociously complicated, and he thinks there's a very good chance, is what he said, that we'll still be negotiating at 1 minute to midnight on March the 29th, 2019, which is, you know, the very last minute before we tumble out of the EU. So if that were right, of course, there would be a vote on a deal after we're already out, and most MPs think that would make us a tin pot democracy because Parliament wouldn't have any power in those circumstances, so they got furious. And so, you know, Prime Minister reverted to the official position, which is they will attempt to do a deal by October of next year to give enough time for our Parliament and Europe's parliaments to vote the deal through.
OK. Is it right, though? I mean, I get the impression sometimes that we haven't really got to the start line of all the substance with this. Fair or not fair, do you think?
No, completely fair. I mean, I think it was also clear from what I was just saying that I don't have a lot of confidence in the Prime Minister's official position that it'll all be done and dusted by October of next year, partly because on the other side of the negotiation, other EU government heads, and in particular Michel Barnier, who heads the negotiation for the EU, I think it's for the birds that the detail of our future relationship with the EU will be negotiated by next October. They believe it will take years. And the fundamental problem for Theresa May is not only that she's got an unrealistic timetable, but she hasn't even had a debate with her cabinet about what kind of trade deal we want. Because were she to have that debate, some of her cabinet would probably say they don't like what they hear and they might threaten to quit.
I think I'm prepared to say, oh dear, at the end of that, but let's see. All right, for now, Robert, thank you very much indeed.